India is the world's largest democracy, and so Parliament is going to be honored to have the Indian Prime Minister come and address it. We have had a number of memoranda of understanding have been signed between Ghana and India to give impetus to our commitment and aspirations for sustained and enhanced cooperation. And these include the Memorandum of Understanding on the establishment of a permanent joint commission between our two countries, the Memorandum of Understanding between the Institute of Traditional and Alternative Medicine and the University of Health and Allied Sciences in Ho, Ghana, and the Institute of Teaching and Research in Ayurveda, Ministry of Ayush, Government of India. We've also signed an MOU on cultural exchange between our two countries, and also an MOU between the Bureau of India Standards and the Ghana Standards Authority. We also have requested the signing of MOUs on vaccine manufacture and production, MOU on supply of agricultural machinery and implements, and an MOU on defense cooperation.
It was a misty morning in the forests of Ghana. A farmer wielding a machete slashes open a cocoa pod. Inside, bright white beans glisten with promise. But those beans, those future chocolate bars, are caught in a tug of war no one sees. On one side, West Africa's cocoa fields are shrinking under climate stress, smuggled across borders, or lost to corrupt pricing. On the other side, emerging demand is exploding elsewhere, especially in India, whose appetite for chocolate is growing fast, even as its own cocoa output plays catch-up. And in the middle, U.S. chocolate giants, who have long depended on Ghana's reliable supply, are facing something they never expected: a shifting map of power in the cocoa world. What if India isn't just a new buyer but a serious contender? What if U.S. companies might lose their grip? Stay with me. By the end of this video you'll see how this transformation could completely reshape where you get your chocolate, how much you pay, and who controls the sweetest parts of the global food economy. Ghana isn't just a cocoa producer today, it is one of the pillars of global chocolate supply. Yet that foundation is showing cracks. First, shrinking output. In the 2023-24 cocoa season, Ghana's production plunged to its lowest in over 2 decades. A major part of the drop came from smuggling some 160,000 tons of beans, more than a third of what was expected, slipped out illegally. Second, environmental stress. Climate change, more disease, older trees, and imperfect pollination are all dragging yields downward. When Ghana's rain patterns shift, the cocoa trees suffer. When pollinators vanish, fewer pods. These aren't future threats, they are happening now. Third, economic stress on the farmers. Smuggling doesn't just steal beans, it steals livelihood. Payment delays, unstable local prices versus what smugglers offer, and government budgets that can't always keep promises. So Ghana is wobbling, and when it wobbles, the whole supply chain trembles. But just as one pillar weakens, another is growing stronger. The next section will show where demand is mounting and why India matters more than ever. India's demand for chocolate is booming, and it's not just about sweet tooth indulgence. The Indian chocolate market is expected to more than double in value by 2032, rising from about $2.6 billion in 2023 to over $5.3 billion. That means millions more bars being sold, more imports, more pressure on global cocoa supplies. India currently imports around 70% of its cocoa, because domestic production, while growing, still falls far short. What's driving this surge? Rising incomes, urbanization, change in eating habits, and brand penetration. India isn't just buying more, it's also developing local production and processing capacity. State-level cocoa farms are expanding, more farmers are switching intercropping to full cocoa plantations. But that growth comes with costs, because global supply is tight thanks to Ghana, Ivory Coast problems, climate change, smuggling demand. From India adds stress to the existing bottlenecks. Cocoa futures have spiked, prices have soared. So India is not just a new mouth to feed, it could become a pivot point in how cocoa is sourced, priced, and distributed globally. But what does that mean for U.S. chocolate giants? That's coming up next. Picture this: Hershey, Mars, Mondelez, names that have long dominated the chocolate aisle, are used to assuming cocoa from West Africa, especially Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, will flow steadily. But those assumptions are being challenged because of disruptions in Ghana smuggling, decreased production, higher costs. The cost of cocoa has shot up. Prices in 2024 and early 2025 set records. Hershey, for example, announced double-digit price increases for its chocolate products because of unprecedented cocoa price surges. U.S. firms also face regulatory and environmental pressures like rules against deforestation, demands for traceable supply chains, sustainability standards that make sourcing from Ghana more complex and costly. Then there's competition. If India ramps up demand, possibly negotiates directly with producers, sets up processing locally, or forms stronger trade ties, it could pull supply in directions U.S. companies didn't expect. That means U.S. giants might have to pay more, accept lower margins, or shift their sourcing. And their cost structure could look very different in a few years. But the supply side isn't just reacting, it's trying to adapt too. Next, we look at how Ghana and even India are pivoting. Ghana isn't sitting idle. First, policy changes. The Ghana Cocoa Board (COCOBOD) has increased farm gate prices by large amounts to compete with smugglers and to incentivize farmers to sell locally rather than illegally smuggle. There's also tighter enforcement against smuggling when wrong prices or delayed payments push farmers to smuggle. The state is trying to close those gaps. Second, the Ghana Côte d'Ivoire Cocoa Initiative (CIGC) is acting like a cartel of sorts, working together to influence global pricing, set standards, and push back against buyers that don't pay fairly. Third, local value addition. Instead of just exporting raw beans, Ghana is trying to process more of its cocoa into butter, powder, maybe chocolate locally. This gives more value to the country, more jobs, and more leverage in contracts. Fourth, supporting farmers. Efforts to improve yields via better farming practices, more resilient tree varieties, more research into pollination and soil health, because losing yield means losing power. Despite all this, Ghana's challenges are deep, weather doesn't wait, smuggling networks are savvy, and global markets punish delays. When Ghana stutters, others rush, and India might be that other. Which brings us to how India is not just a buyer but a potential rival producer and processing hub. India's growing hunger for cocoa is pushing it toward two paths: scale up as a buyer and scale up as a producer or processor. The second path matters more for challengers. Domestic production in India is small today compared to Ghana or Ivory Coast, but growth has been steady. Farms in Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu are expanding. Yield per hectare is improving. Many cocoa plantations in India are still intercropped, planted alongside banana, coconuts, etc., but some are moving toward dedicated cocoa farms. Processing capacity is also rising. India is importing a lot of raw cocoa and cocoa products, powder, butter, and investing in value-add downstream segments. This means more control over quality, more negotiating power, fewer middlemen. But there are hurdles: climate suitability, disease, capital, infrastructure, and experience. Also, Indian farmers are competing with other crops. Cocoa needs steady rain, shade, soil health, and even with yield improvements, catching up to Ghana's or Côte d'Ivoire's scale will take time. Still, the trend is unmistakable, and it creates a question. Will India's rise reduce U.S. chocolate giants' dependency on West African beans? Let's imagine two possible futures and what they could mean for U.S. chocolate giants, consumers, and producers. Scenario A: moderate shift. India continues to increase demand, buys more Ghanaian cocoa, but doesn't fully supplant U.S. buyers. Ghana stabilizes its production via policy, price incentives, improved farming. U.S. giants pay more, restructure supply chains, maybe shift some sourcing to other countries or accelerate investments in plantations or processing in other regions. Chocolate gets more expensive. Some brands differentiate on ethical sourcing, traceability, climate resilience. Consumers see price creep, but supply remains relatively stable. Scenario B: major disruption. India becomes a top-tier competitor for Ghana's cocoa. India invests in its own plantations and processing to the extent that it begins to draw cocoa volumes away from U.S. firms. Simultaneously, Ghana's production continues to slip due to environmental changes, smuggling, and underinvestment. U.S. firms find supply less stable, need to source from less traditional producers or pay premiums that could reduce margins or force price hikes for consumers. Brands lose market share if they can't adapt. Also, there could be geopolitical consequences: trade deals, bilateral pacts, maybe even national interventions. In both scenarios, one thing is clear: the U.S. giant sold assumptions steady supply from Ghana, cheap or stable pricing, little interference are no longer guaranteed, and India's involvement is not just demand, it could reshape power. But what are the actual risks U.S. companies face, and how can they respond? If you were Hershey, Mars, or Mondelez, what's your playbook now? These are some moves under discussion or possible. Diversify sourcing. Look beyond Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. Pull beans from Latin America, Southeast Asia, or new African producers with untapped potential. Vertical integration. Buy or invest in plantations, processing facilities, or even in upstream services like fertilizers. Pest control, anything that reduces vulnerability. If you control more of the chain, volatility hurts less. local partnerships, work with Ghana governments, COCOBOD, farmer cooperatives to ensure fair prices, faster payments, less smuggling both for stability and ethical reputation, innovation in climate resilience, research disease-resistant cocoa trees, shade-grown systems, better pollination strategies. Also invest in sustainability claims since consumers are increasingly paying attention, transparent pricing and contracts, long-term contracts with clear terms, premiums for quality or sustainability, possibly even forward agreements that allow buyers to lock in supplies ahead. If U.S. firms do some of these, they may offset the threat. But the pressure is real and in many ways, the advantage is shifting. We started this video with that cocoa pod in Ghana. And what I want you to walk away thinking is this: the world that once gave U.S. chocolate giants room to assume to depend to dominate may be changing fast. Ghana is struggling with its foundation climate, smuggling, economic stress. India is rising not just as a big fan of chocolate, but as a serious actor in the cocoa economy. U.S. companies are squeezed from both ends, supply is tighter, costs are higher, and competition is intensifying, but it's not hopeless and not irreversible. If companies invest wisely, support farmers, embrace sustainable practices, forge new partnerships, build resilient supply chains, then chocolate lovers everywhere may still get their bars, maybe even better ones, and Ghana could win more of the value rather than just being the supplier of beans. In the end, the fight over cocoa isn't just business. It's about who reaps what reward, who bears what risk, and who holds the power in global food chains. And right now, that power may be shifting.